What's up? It's April 10th. Crazy day. The biggest psychological growth day, I would say, of my trading career. And so coming into the day, had a bit more of a bullish lean even after CPI because we had obvious draw here. This high seeming to be obvious. I actually do think this draw is taken on ES, but either way, we were in a position where I could have liked to see us pull back into this 4 hour with the lows stacked above it. But at the same time, pretty clear with this high being put in by CPI and with it actually being the data high coming so close to this high time frame high that I'd be leaning bullish. And the first thought was for us to pull back into the 4 hour and then look for longs, but then these lows started to stack above the 15-minute. And so then I started thinking, well, based on this range, this shorter, lower time frame range, if we trace our fib to the CPI high, this 15-minute gap was below equilibrium and it was within the right range of where you'd be looking for a bounce. And sometimes when the draw is strong enough, such as a data high, you wouldn't necessarily need as big of a pullback, even if higher time frame were super in premium. It wouldn't make a ton of sense if this draw was going to be as strong as it was for us to pull back. Now, could it have happened? Definitely. It definitely could pull back and still go to data high. That's not an unreasonable thing to expect either. It's just based on how price was reacting to this 15-minute, it started to make a ton of sense to start to look for longs here. And so I took 3 trades, which is usually more than I intend to, but it made a lot of sense for today, and I'll explain why. This first trade, first I want to comment on a trade that I think a lot of people took, which is this 1 minute inverse to the upside. And technically you had an SMT with ES hitting the same 15-minute, NQ not hitting this 15-minute. And so mechanically speaking, you have a very clear buy side draw with the data high. You have an SMT with ES delivering from a higher time frame PD array, the SMT being that NQ hadn't hit it as well. You have a break even point with the swing high. So on paper, it's like, oh shit, like this is like perfect. Like this is exactly what I'm looking for a long to a data high. But there's a lot of issues with this trade, or I shouldn't say there's enough issues with this trade to where it's one that you want to fade moving forward. I think a lot of the reason you jump into a trade like this stems from FOMO, if you're just honest with yourself about it, because it's pretty clear before I even explain why that this trade is lower probability relative to a setup that you could potentially take. For one, you've got basically no liquidity generated to the upside aside from your target. Like, yes, is this a break even point? Sure. But you know as well as I do, without me even needing to explain it, how much higher probability it's going to be when you have a lot more stuff generated in the same direction. On top of that, was it technically an SMT at the 15-minute? Sure. But was NQ delivering from anything to have this move up? No. For one, we're not really delivering from anything unless you plan on adding 1 minute continuations to your playbook, which I personally don't, or 2 minutes, I guess. But either way, not really delivering from anything, actually created even some relative equal lows on a higher time frame with a 2 minute below. Either way, though, just none of this would have been the best bounce area. And you also have literal equal lows at this untapped 50-minute on NQ. And so, with it technically being by the black and white rules an SMT, could NQ have left the 15-minute behind? Sure, like it's possible, but at the same time, you're literally trading with equal lows untapped 15-minute at your stop loss. And so that's just not ideal. It doesn't matter if ES is taking it or not. That's always going to be something that lowers the probability of your setup playing out. And so, with that in mind, you can sit here and know, okay, like the data high is the draw. Like, sure, this checks the boxes, but why would I want to position myself into a trade that I know is lower probability when I could just get a higher probability setup? Like, sometimes you're going to know the draw on liquidity and the setup's just not really going to be there. You don't have to force your way in and just find any excuse. I know it's really easy, especially early on, when you know what the draw is or when you have a lot of conviction in the draw. It's super easy to be like just seeking and searching for just any excuse to enter, right? Like just any reasonable IFEG with delivery from anything, any reason that I could possibly find to target this high, I want to jump into. And that was a big thing that I did in February too, where a lot of my losses were just from me having a ton of conviction in the draw, but then looking for just any excuse possible to jump in. And that's a mistake long term. That's just going to position you in lower probability setups to where you're going to end up getting clapped. And so that's why I faded it. It makes sense on paper with the SMT and whatever else, but at the same time, I'm sure it's pretty clear and obvious why it was one that you could have avoided. Now, for this first next trade, I took this. Ronan took this. I haven't looked to see what Patty and Blake took yet, but I know Ronan took it and then crashed out. motherfucker. And I blew up after he took this loss. This was a good trade. Was it the best trade ever? Not necessarily, because the manipulation isn't crazy strong, but I also do think it's enough so with a strong enough reaction to where we swept those relative equal lows, tapped into the 15-minute. Now you're delivering from a PD array. Also, you have a stop hunt of this trade. You have the stop hunt of this trade. You have this swing point high generated to where now you don't just have one thing that you're targeting. You got 2 points of liquidity to be targeting. V-shape inverse, really strong close. This is a good trade, I think. I think, like, it's easy to sit here after a loss and be like, oh, like I could have done this or it could have been this. It could have been a better manipulation leg, whatever. But I think that this was a trade that I take 10 out of 10 times. I have a hard time imagining myself not taking it, even though in the moment I was talking about having questions about whether or not I would want to take a trade off this 15-minute. Ultimately, with the structure that was built, the stop hunt, and then the reaction, it's just one that you got to take with the way that we trade. And so we took it. Initially, instant and drawdown, being pretty sus. Price action's been weird. Ended up just getting stuck in a chop fest, unfortunately. At the exact same time, there was a weird break in correlation, too, where ES was just like way down, even as NQ was up here. And ultimately, ended up pulling back and hitting our stop loss. So I think that this is safe to chalk up just as like a statistical loss that you can is unavoidable, one that you're going to take trying to trade the way that we trade, delivering off the 15-minute inverse, blah, 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 good targets, so on. Then we have this second trade that I took. Now, this one, I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and say this is my worst of the 3 trades just because it lost the fastest or whatever else. But it's a lot of the same idea. A lot of the same ideas to this trade. We were still actively respecting the 15-minute. We had the manipulation lower from 10 a.m. And then we get the resweep of these lows. And there was actively, if I'm not mistaken, an SMT at that low as well. Let me make sure. Yeah. So we had an SMT at these lows, where these lows were intact on ES, swept on NQ. So you have the additional SMT looking for even more liquidity, like way more generated in the direction of what we wanted to target now. So again, just another confluence that adds to the conviction. And on top of that, we had an untapped 4-minute that had just formed quite literally right here. And it also ended up turning into a 5-minute. And so like for us to have a resweep of the lows, SMT, 30-second inverse with more liquidity generated in that direction, it was impossible in the moment for me to imagine us not hitting this 4-minute. Clearly it did, so it wasn't impossible. I don't really know how I feel about this trade. I feel like it's good, but it also feels very similar to some of my older losses, and so it's one that I'm going to talk to my mentors about when I get the chance. But either way, the idea was pretty similar to this one, and then this final trade ultimately ended up being the same idea as the first two, except now we get an even more clean manipulation leg to the downside. We have a 1-minute inverse rather than just a 30-second with crazy momentum and strength in the inversing candle. So full body close, no wick. Usually after 2 losses, it's not a bad idea at all to call it a day. But this was just too clean of a setup for me to just ignore, especially since it happened right after I'd gotten stop hunted, turned into liquidity. It was like a perfect re-entry opportunity. I wasn't going to be upset. I would have been much more upset with myself if I hadn't taken it and then it ended up playing out with the level of conviction that I had that at the very least we were going to tap this 4-minute, which we did instantaneously, like literally seconds after jumping in. So it was a free trade. I knew that we were going to tap into the 4/5-minute and it was going to give me the chance to go break even. Then it ended up turning into the most stressful and psychologically difficult and emotional trade of my entire life by far. Just with all the conditions of everything that's been happening lately with me taking the losses and whatnot, as I'm sure you can imagine, the intensity of making the decision to stick to my rules, maintain my execution, and not have my emotions impact the decision making was the hardest thing I've ever done, probably relative to trading, where I was in this full size. I took this for a mini. So even pretty quickly, pretty low here on the move would have been enough for me to get out of this red day. And it was the first day on the fundeds. I was already down $800. So it was like 800 times 5. And so it was like everything in me was screaming like, oh man, like this is an opportunity to get back to green. I don't have to worry about the stress of a red day. All the emotions that, we all usually feel when you're in that spot. But I had made the decision I was going to maintain conviction in the draw. The one thing about this that I had some questions about for myself in the moment too was whether or not, given conditions, since we were chopping around as much as we were, if it was smarter to maybe potentially TP at this high and take your piece of the pie. And I think that if you had done that with this trade, it would be reasonable because of the conditions specifically. I don't think that it's a bad idea. Because again, I've said this in probably 50% of the trade recaps, but as Patty has said so many times, It's one thing to know where price is going. It's another thing to know when price is going to get there. And for us to reject this high the way that we did, totally reasonable and totally possible that we would have pulled back even more, stopped me out at break even, or even swept these lows. I mean, you had like relative equal lows on both ES and NQ2 at the stops at this point. Totally reasonable that we would have been engineering more liquidity, pulled back, stopped us out, and then went. Luckily, we had a 5-minute form that ended up saving us. This 5-minute BPR, honestly, insane how to the tick it ended up being. We had this crazy Trump tweet candle that happened in the middle of it as well, where on the 30-second, I remember I was watching the 30-second and just this instantaneous dump just straight to it. But as it started to respect it, I gained a lot more conviction, and this trade turned into more than just a trade for me. It wasn't about the P&L. It was about it being an opportunity for me to have the best psychological management that I've ever had in my entire life with a trade long term. It ended up being an hour and 10 minutes of just pure agony for us to adjust to, just unbelievable stress. I don't even know what I'm going to do for the Instagram video for the day from the live trade, because I think for the majority of it, I'm just staring silently at the screen. But you understand the idea, and why this one's an even higher probability setup than the other ones is now we have multiple stop hunts, and all of this generated in this direction. Aside from what we were already targeting to begin with, like say you didn't take this second trade, and say you were considering between taking this trade or even this trade, this initial one we talked about, versus this trade. Like both of these trades have similar ideas and premises, right? Basically the exact same draw, same idea, same entry model, even. So when you look at them on paper, you can come up with reasoning for both of them. They both have the SMT, they both have the V shape, strong body close, they both have the break even point. But the big difference, and the thing that contributes to this one being so much higher probability, is now we have generated all of this, like this just insane shit in the direction of what we're targeting, which just makes it so much more likely that we're going to at the very least run this, even if we don't end up running the full TP. And so we did run that. That's where it got kind of sketchy too for holding. Luckily, the 5-minute ended up holding, and we ended up having the right draw. But those are the ideas behind the 3 trades. Yeah, that's the end of the day. I hope you have a nice weekend. We're going to bounce back next week. Sorry for you if you got clapped on CPI. I know a lot of guys in the group did too. Very weird candles it's been doing lately. And yeah, let's try and get the other 15 accounts back next week, and then we'll be crushing it, and then we'll go from there. Peace.